So the Book of Kings is a compilation of two books, First Kings and Second Kings. In our Bibles today, we have it as two separate books, but originally they were one book. They are lengthy books. Both books are quite lengthy. Put together, they can be a little difficult to handle. Such a long book. Think also of having to contain everything within long scrolls during the times when we did not have the modern printing technology that exists today, or even the digital technology that we enjoy the benefits of today. So for ease of handling during the time that the Old Testament was translated into the Greek version, which is known as the Septuagint, was when it is believed that the Book of Kings was separated into two books. It's just for ease of handling, like I said, but the story flows as one. There is one overarching narrative. So it is easy to read. Obviously, you're not going to read it in one sitting, but it actually covers a very, very long period of history. It is believed that this was written sometime between 560 to 550 BC. This is after the time of the Babylonian exile. And it does cover a very long period of history. It covers the time from the very last days of King David to the reign of his son Solomon, and then his son after him, under whom the United Kingdom splits off into two, and all the way until the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians. Now, under the United Kingdom, as you can tell from this map, it was one unified kingdom under the reigns of King David and King Solomon. All the 12 tribes were under the reign of one king at a time. But that changes during the time of Rehoboam. And that is unfortunate because that is an irreversible turn of events that happens because of the displeasure of God, because of the rebellion of its people. And yet, God finds an ingenious way to preserve his people as well as maintain the covenant that he had made to King David. Now, these events are capturing times from approximately 960 BC, from the last days of King David, the beginning of the reign of his son, King Solomon, to 561 BC, a few years after the Babylonian exile. So 390 years, it's a long period of history to be covered across these two books. Who the writer was is unknown to us. Jewish tradition believes that it could possibly be the prophet Jeremiah. We do not know for certain. It is likely. Jeremiah lived during the time of the Babylonian exile. His heart was for his people, beating for the people of Judah, wanting them to take heed from what had happened to the northern kingdom Assyria. So he could have been a likely writer, but we do not know for sure. The books are actually compiled from sources that are cited within the book of First Kings and Second Kings themselves. So these books refer to the annals of King Solomon, refer to the book of the annals of the kings of Israel, the book of the annals of the kings of Judah, and some other sources. So First and Second Kings was actually a compilation of these sources put together by a master editor to create one continuous historical and theological narrative to serve a purpose. And that purpose is to encourage the people who are living under captivity in the Babylonian exile, and it's to preserve their history, to preserve the history of the unified kingdom, Israel, and then Israel and Judah, for the benefit of the Jews living in exile in Babylon, lest they think that God's dealings with them had come to an end, that this was the erasure of all of their history. Somebody has taken the trouble of compiling from a variety of sources a historical record to be preserved for all time. And we benefit from that meticulous work today. What the books record for us are lessons of the unfaithfulness of the people of Israel and Judah, but also lessons of the gracious preservation of their God, the God of Israel and Judah, who does not give up on his people despite their hard-heartedness, despite them being rebellious and stiff-necked. God is persevering with them. Now, God is a just God. He punishes them for their sins. And what happens to them is a culmination of the prophetic warnings that have been delivered through the various prophets that God had sent, both to Israel and to Judah. Israel and Judah do not take heed, and ultimately the judgments befall them exactly as the prophets had predicted and foretold. So here, the people of Judah are utterly devastated by the Babylonian exile, yet consoled and encouraged in the knowledge that their story has not come to an end, that God has not written the final word on their story. And that is a great encouragement for us even today. Now, what is happening in Israel and even in Judah at this time? Like I said, 1st and 2nd Kings are actually picking up from the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. 1st and 2nd Samuel include a lot of description of how David becomes God's appointed king over Israel. At that time, it was one kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. However, tragically, the kingdom splits into two at the time of King Rehoboam. He is a foolish king. He listens to some ill-sought advice from his young counselors instead of heeding to the advice of the counselors from his father's time, and decides to come down even harder and heavier on the people who are already oppressed under a heavy system of taxation. So because he does not take heed, the people rebel against him, and the kingdom splits off into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Judah is where King David is from, and they are still, not surprisingly, loyal to King David and to his descendants. God had promised David that there will never be a time that you will not have a descendant to sit before me on your throne. So God is fulfilling that covenant in an incredible way, in an ingenious way. However, what happens to the northern kingdom? The northern kingdom is cut off from the lineage of David, and they have kings from 9 lines of families. And it is a really disjointed, corrupt ruling of several lines of families without even a single righteous king, not even one good king. And these kings are not in a continuous lineage. There have been several assassinations. One king comes up because he assassinates and rebels, overthrows, carries out a coup against the former king. So it is not really a righteous ruling. They are receiving the kind of kings that they deserve because they have rebelled and turned their backs against God and his righteous decrees. So in following the ways and patterns of the nations, they are ultimately receiving the types of hardened kings that the pagan nations around Israel had, instead of just rulers who would reign according to the rule of God, where God had commanded that they would not elevate themselves over their countrymen. They are serving their countrymen. But when they turn their backs on God's righteous decrees, they end up receiving the rulers they receive. Judah is somewhat more refreshing. They do have some righteous kings. All in all, there are 20 kings who rule over Judah and 19 in Israel. Zedekiah is the last king of Judah. Hoshea is the last king of Israel. Now, in all this time, in all this long history, there are 2 momentous events that bring about the end of these 2 kingdoms. The northern kingdom comes to an end because it is taken captive by the king of Assyria in 722 BC. Judah does not get captured by their enemies or by Assyria. Instead, they go on for 136 years more, ultimately falling to Babylonian captivity in 586 BC under King Nebuchadnezzar. So when we go to 2 Kings, up to chapter 17, we see the account of the last king of Israel, King Hoshea. And then we have Shalmaneser, who's the king of Assyria. He captures Samaria, lays siege against the capital city, and deports the Israelites over to Assyria and resettles them in Assyrian towns. But the story continues. Judah does not come to an end. Judah goes on for another 136 years. So 2 Kings 18 up until the final chapter is an account of the additional 8 rulers that Judah has, some of them good kings. And God has graciously prolonged, the longevity of the kingdom. Why? To give them time to repent. This is an opportunity for Judah to learn hard lessons from not listening to God, from engaging in evil acts, from engaging in idolatry, from engaging in abominable practices, including divination, the sacrifice of their own sons and daughters to the fire, just like the pagan nations around them did to their abominable pagan gods like Chemosh and Molech. Things that God absolutely abhorred, that were inhuman. So they commit these wicked acts. They're oppressing the poor. The divide among the kings and the people is widening. There is oppression in the land. The widows, the poor, the children are being mistreated. God is sending them prophets again and again. This would have been a great time for Judah to finally turn back from their wicked ways and turn toward God. But that does not happen. And that is baffling. Perhaps we would have done the same things in their place. I suppose we're not still learning, from the lessons that God is teaching us today through His Word. So maybe it's not that much of a surprise that Judah does not learn either. And ultimately what happens as a result of their hard-heartedness is that their kingdom too comes to an end. Judah ceases to exist as an independent kingdom under the rule of the continuous line of David's descendants, with Zedekiah being the last king. The temple is burned to fire. All important buildings and palaces are razed to the ground, and the kingdom comes to an absolutely tragic end. King Hezekiah is one of the good kings. He reigns in Judah, right? He is the son of King Ahaz. His father was a wicked king. In fact, he was so wicked that he burned one of his own sons in the fire. That is the father out of whom this righteous king comes, right? So sons are not destined to follow in the footsteps of their fathers. And God, who is angry with a wicked king, shows extreme graciousness to the righteous son who follows after him. So Hezekiah is this righteous king who is keen to follow in the footsteps of his ancestor David. He destroys the high places. He abolishes the idols. He brings idolatry to an end officially as the ruler of Judah. He does what was right in the eyes of God. At this time, he also demonstrates what faith in God is like. At this time, during his reign, there is a parallel threat in the northern kingdom. Sennacherib is the king of Assyria after Shalmaneser. After the Assyrian captivity, the next king of Assyria has trained his eyes on Judah. He recognizes that Judah is vulnerable, right? They don't have a lot of manpower. They don't have a lot of allies they can turn to. And so this is an opportune time to attack the towns of Judah. So Sennacherib tries to capture Lachish, and to some extent he is successful, right? He does attack and invade some towns in Judah. lays siege to Lachish, and this is actually recorded for us in history extra biblically. There is a fascinating archaeological find. It is one of the prisms. It's called the Oriental Institute Prism because that's where it is. It is recording the annals of Sennacherib the king. It is dated to 689 BC, and it is describing Sennacherib's siege of Lachish in the territory of Judah during the reign of King Hezekiah. And it is actually corroborating for us the historical accounts from the Bible in Isaiah, in 2 Kings, and in 2 Chronicles. He is calling out Hezekiah by name. He's saying, as for Hezekiah, I shut him up like a caged bird in his royal city of Jerusalem. What it does not say is that he managed to successfully invade Jerusalem. And that is because he is in fact not successful in capturing Jerusalem. Because something else happens, right? When Sennacherib threatens Hezekiah, threatens the people, what does Hezekiah do? He seeks God. He seeks God through his prophet Isaiah. He goes to the temple of the Lord. In 2 Kings 19, it is written, when King Hezekiah heard this, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and went into the temple of the Lord. He sent Eliakim, the palace administrator, Shebna, the secretary, and the leading priests, all wearing sackcloth to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos. They told him, this is what Hezekiah says. This day is a day of distress and rebuke and disgrace, as when children come to the moment of birth and there is no strength to deliver them. It may be that the Lord your God will hear all the words of the field commander, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to ridicule the living God, and that he will rebuke him for the words the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, pray for the remnant that still survives. So he demonstrates the right attitude. He seeks God's counsel. He seeks help from God, and God, through his prophet Isaiah, assures Hezekiah, predicts that Hezekiah would not have to do a thing. The king of Assyria is going to hear a report. He's going to turn away, and God is going to miraculously intervene and save King Hezekiah and the people of Judah from the hand of the cruel king of Assyria. That's exactly what happens. In the following chapter, we read that this king hears a report that makes him turn to Nineveh. But what happens before that is God miraculously, directly intervenes by striking down and destroying the Assyrian army. Right? Over 185,000 people in the army. That is a mass casualty. So obviously there is not going to be any strength left in the army to put up a fight. The king flees and he remains in Nineveh, where one day he enters the temple of his god Nisroch to bow down before him. And what happens? His own sons cut him down by the sword. He's killed by his own sons. So none of his threats against Jerusalem come to fruition because God miraculously intervenes and does something incredible in response to the heart of a righteous king. He wasn't perfect. Hezekiah has made some missteps. He actually seeks an alliance with the king of Egypt. But despite that, God is so gracious. God demonstrates to him that he moves on behalf of his people. He answers prayer. But really, after Hezekiah, there is one other good king, his great-grandson Josiah, who initiates some reforms. But after that, things go downhill. I do want to point to you one other awe-inspiring archaeological find, because this is so incredible in that, God does preserve for us extra biblical accounts just so we can have, reassurance in the authenticity and the historicity of our scriptures. When this king of Assyria is threatening Hezekiah, Hezekiah is doing some preparations. He is fortifying the walls around the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the capital city, right? So he is building an extra wall, he's reinforcing the terraces. However, there is one vulnerable spot, and that is the water supply of the city of Jerusalem. There is a main source of water supply, which is the Gihon spring, located more than 1,000 feet from the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Now that puts them in a weak spot. Why? Because the king of Assyria and his army can easily cut off the access of the people of Jerusalem. And what happens if they cannot have access to water? Right? They're going to die of extreme thirst. So what if they have these great fortified walls that provide them with bolstered defense? It's not going to be enough if they don't have water to drink. And that water could be used by the king of Assyria for his army's purposes. So Hezekiah does something ingenious. In a marvelous feat of engineering, and to this day, scientists don't really have an answer as to how exactly it was accomplished in a time where there were no, modern tools and modern technology, no GPS. How did they do it? What Hezekiah does is he consults his military staff and he gets to work. He reroutes the waters of the Gihon spring and brings it into the city wall, into the pool of Siloam where it empties, so that they don't have to worry about being vulnerable to the water supply being cut off by the king of Assyria. And in the late 1800s, there was an inscription that was discovered. It's called the Siloam inscription. And that actually describes, the triumph of the crew of stonecutters that was working on this tremendous project. It seems that there were two crews that were working on opposite ends, basically sort of carving out this subterranean tunnel through the rock and working from opposite directions but meeting in the middle. And that is recorded for us in the Siloam inscription that definitively linked it to King Hezekiah in the late 1800s. So this is such a marvelous feat of engineering. More than that, it is really, breathtaking, because today this is a tourist attraction. You can actually go to Jerusalem and see this tunnel that was built 2,700 years ago. And it corroborates this account that is recorded for us in scripture. One of those accounts is in 2 Chronicles 32. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that he intended to wage war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials and military staff about blocking off the water from the springs outside the city, and they helped him. They gathered a large group of people who blocked all the springs and the stream that flowed through the land. Why should the kings of Assyria come and find plenty of water, they said. Then he worked hard, repairing all the broken sections of the wall and building towers on it. He built another wall outside that one and reinforced the terraces of the city of David. So these are historical accounts. It's not a collection of myths and fables and legends. No, this is living, breathing structures. Well, it's not that the rock is living, but the fact that the living scripture has been recorded for us should really inspire in us a lot of confidence in the scriptures that have been preserved for us thousands of years later.